ladies and gentlemen. As night falls and the body succumbs to the silent gravity of sleep, something ancient awakens, not the mind nor the body, but the soul. For while we assume the ego slumbers peacefully, there exists a realm deeper than dreams, more vivid than visions, and older than time itself, a place where the soul wanders freely beyond the tyranny of waking logic. This is the land that the mystic Edgar Cayce touched upon, not in myth, but in experience. He was not a prophet in the theatrical sense, but a mirror to something forbidden, not by man, but by the narrow architecture of rationality. His visions, dismissed by many, spoke to the hidden chambers of the self, and in them a truth echoed, that the soul does not sleep. It travels, it sees. When the eyes close, the soul unfastens from the flesh like vapor from warm water. What it sees is not the future nor the past, but the eternal, the blueprint of existence drawn behind the veil of matter. Cayce described realms of light and shadow, of timeless temples and ageless wisdom. But such images are not fantasies. They are symbols, archetypes, projections of our deepest psychic inheritance. What your soul actually sees while you sleep is the unfolding of its own mystery. Not in words, but in symbols, a stairway spiraling upward into a starless sky, a face behind a veil that speaks without sound, oceans that shimmer with colors not found on any earthly palette. These are not hallucinations. They are the language of the psyche, which speaks not in sentences, but in myth, metaphor, and eternal images. In those forbidden visions, the soul remembers. It remembers what the waking mind has forgotten, that it is older than the body and wiser than the intellect. It recalls the primordial unity that predates division, the source from which we have all fallen, and to which all must return. Each night becomes a subtle resurrection, a small death and rebirth, where we rehearse the final transition not with fear, but with familiarity. There is something within you that cannot be touched by time. It is this essence that Cayce witnessed traveling through the dream. In his trance states, he accessed not fantasy, but a deeper layer of reality, one that our waking eyes are too blind to see. But the soul? It is never blind. It sees through the fog of time and illusion. And yet these visions are forbidden not because they are evil or false, but because they demand the collapse of ego. They require the surrender of certainty. They invite the death of identity as we know it. To see what the soul sees is to lose one's name and find something vaster. It is to step beyond personal narrative into the collective dream of the cosmos. The ancient temples seen in sleep, the light beings, the lost cities, the floating symbols, are the soul's alphabet. They point not outward, but inward, toward the origin, toward the self. And what the soul truly seeks in those nocturnal voyages is not knowledge. It seeks reunion with itself, with the divine pattern, with that which was forgotten when we were born. So if you ask what your soul actually sees while you sleep, know this: it sees what is real, but invisible. It sees what has always been, but cannot be spoken. It sees what Cayce called forbidden, because it belongs to a dimension where language dissolves and only truth remains. And every morning you return from that journey, but you do not come back empty. You carry fragments, a strange dream, a feeling, a symbol, all cloaked in amnesia. But they are keys waiting for recognition. They are echoes of a vision too vast to hold in waking hands. They are reminders that you are not just a body in time, you are a soul in eternity. Let us, then, not be afraid to sleep, for when the soul roams beyond the stars, it does not lose itself. It finds the map back home. When the physical body surrenders to sleep, a hidden process begins, one not governed by biology alone, but by the deeper architecture of human consciousness. The soul, no longer tethered tightly to the limits of the five senses, begins to drift into a field of perception far more expansive than the waking world. It does not dream in the way the ego understands dreaming. It perceives in symbols, archetypes, and emotional truths. These are not hallucinations or random neurological firings, but messages from the deeper unconscious strata, a realm where time collapses and space bends, where knowledge appears as direct experience rather than intellectual constructs. The images witnessed are not bound to waking logic, but instead speak in the language of eternal realities, realities which the soul recognizes intuitively, though the mind cannot interpret them clearly. Here, we find staircases that lead into light, oceans made of memory, temples not built by hands, and presences that shimmer with impossible familiarity. The soul's vision in sleep often reveals that which has been repressed or ignored by the ego consciousness. It accesses the forgotten, the avoided, the sacred. In the silence of the night, stripped of daily noise and identity, the soul sees with eyes unclouded by social expectation or linear reasoning. What it sees is not fiction, but a deeper form of truth, a symbolic reality that reflects the soul's condition, longing, and trajectory. A desert may represent a spiritual void, a locked door might point to a repressed trauma or an unopened potential. But more than this, the soul encounters vast truths beyond personal narrative, glimpses of ancestral memory, encounters with primordial symbols, direct communion with the archetypal forms that structure all human experience. These encounters are not literal, but profoundly real in their own dimension, and they leave impressions more lasting than most waking memories. Such perceptions often occur in a visual and emotional language, filled with metaphor and mystery. The soul does not operate on binary logic. It embraces paradox. It can hold joy and sorrow, death and renewal within the same image. It understands transformation as a cyclical process, not a linear goal. When it sees during sleep, it is not merely observing, it is engaging in a sacred dialogue with the unseen world. The symbols that arise are shaped not only by personal psychology but by the universal matrix of human existence, the collective storehouse of myths, instincts, and spiritual echoes that predate culture. Even when these visions appear chaotic or frightening, they are not malicious. They are expressions of the soul's confrontation with its own forgotten dimensions, often manifesting as dramatic metaphors meant to awaken inner awareness. In this state, the soul is not passive. It is exploring, remembering, and participating in a deeper order of being, one that invites the self to awaken not just from sleep, but from the illusion of separation that defines so much of waking life. Dreams are not empty spectacles or random bursts of neural activity, but encoded communications from the deeper self. When the ego steps aside during sleep, what emerges is a symbolic language that reflects the soul's internal landscape. This language is not learned through education or logic. It is inherited through the unconscious, speaking in images, emotions, and mythic patterns. A dream about falling may reflect spiritual descent, a journey into forgotten parts of the psyche. A bird flying high above a familiar city may suggest a perspective longing to be embraced, a higher view of an ordinary struggle. These are not idle thoughts, but encoded truths, compressed into symbols by the unconscious in an attempt to bypass the limitations of the rational mind. The dream becomes the mirror, and the soul becomes the interpreter, if it is willing to listen. Each symbol in a dream holds multiple layers, reflecting personal, cultural, and archetypal dimensions all at once. The unconscious does not separate the individual from the universal. It speaks to both simultaneously. A river might symbolize a recent emotional experience, a cultural memory of purification, and a universal process of transformation, all in one flowing image. The mind tries to dissect, but the soul intuitively recognizes the depth. This is why some dreams haunt the dreamer for years, not because they are irrational, but because their meaning is not yet ripe for full understanding. They wait silently, like seeds, for the moment when consciousness can catch up to what the soul already knows. In the visions Cayce described, we find this same depth. He spoke of landscapes of light, temples of knowledge and beings of energy who communicate not through speech, but through knowing. These are not projections of fantasy, but expressions of the deep psyche, perhaps even of the soul's own memory of other realms. The images are forbidden not by external authorities, but by the inner censorship of a consciousness that fears what it cannot control. Yet these forbidden visions are deeply human. They offer truths that the surface self often avoids. Death appears in dreams not to frighten, but to initiate. Fire emerges not to destroy, but to purify. Shadows rise not to consume, but to teach. The symbolic realm is rich with messages wrapped in metaphor, and each image becomes a doorway into deeper psychological truths. The conscious mind often forgets these messages upon waking, because the ego is not trained to speak this symbolic tongue, but the emotions linger, a sense of unease, a feeling of clarity, an unexpected peace, all echoing the communication that took place in the unconscious. By learning to understand these symbolic messages, one begins to bridge the waking and sleeping selves. This process is not analytical, but alchemical. It requires patience, openness, and a willingness to encounter parts of the self that do not conform to daylight logic. The more one engages with dreams as encoded messages, the more the soul's deeper wisdom begins to emerge, not only in sleep, but in waking life itself. Edgar Cayce's visions, often labeled as forbidden, do not belong to the realm of fantasy or superstition, but to a dimension of inner reality that challenges the dominance of surface-level consciousness. His ability to enter altered states and receive knowledge beyond his waking intellect reflects a profound engagement with the psychic field that lies beneath the threshold of ordinary awareness. This hidden dimension, which his soul accessed while his body rested, is not unique to mystics or prophets. It is part of the architecture of every human being. What makes Cayce's accounts so unsettling to the rational mind is not their content, but the implications they carry. That there exists a deeper intelligence within us, one that sees, knows, and remembers beyond the limits of time-bound thought. This forbidden psychic dimension is not some supernatural place, but an extension of consciousness itself. It is forbidden because it cannot be owned, categorized, or fully understood by the ego, which craves structure and control. In this inner realm, the soul perceives truths that collapse conventional boundaries. Past and future dissolve into simultaneity, identity becomes fluid, and knowledge comes not from deduction, but from direct immersion. Cayce's visions revealed temples of healing, cosmic records, soul journeys through planetary spheres, all of which can be interpreted not as literal events, but as metaphors for psychic transformation. The Akashic records, for instance, symbolize a deep memory bank of the soul, a place where every intention, emotion, and choice is inscribed in symbolic form. To access such a place is to move beyond personal identity and into the domain of universal memory. The resistance to this inner world is deeply ingrained in modern thought, which equates truth with measurable data. and disregards the unquantifiable. But the soul does not function on empirical terms. It understands essence, not statistics. When Cayce spoke of the soul's journey between incarnations or its life beyond the physical, he was not simply offering spiritual theories. He was reporting what the deeper psyche witnesses when it is free from the conditioning of the waking state. These experiences are disturbing to the rational mind precisely because they undermine the illusion of separateness. They suggest that life is not linear, that the self is not singular, and that consciousness survives death, not metaphorically but fundamentally. To engage with the psychic dimensions Cayce described requires more than belief. It requires a dismantling of the rigid self-concept, the dream state, the trance, the vision. These are thresholds through which the soul passes to perceive itself more clearly. They are not escapes, but encounters. Forbidden only because they demand the courage to let go of certainty, these visions ask us to accept that we are more than bodies, more than memories, more than the voice inside our heads. They ask us to listen to the silence beneath our thoughts, to see with the eyes that open only when our ordinary senses close. In doing so, we are drawn into the mystery that Cayce glimpsed. Not a fantasy world, but the soul's true home, hidden in plain sight beneath the veil of waking life.